All right, here we're moving to period two review, 1648 to 18. So as you can see, in 1815, this is when Napoleon is defeated in Waterloo, and of course the Congress of Vienna. Okay, which we will have a separate sheet on treaties, of course. So really, as we move from new monarchs, we move into the age of absolutism. And you can see over here, right here, you have the divine right of kings is important. That's where they get their authority. You get some French authors who Bossuet, who's going to push this idea of the divine right of kings. Very different than Hobbes. Remember, Hobbes believed in absolutism, but didn't believe in the divine right of kings. He felt that in the state of nature, it was disorder, it was nasty, it was brutish, and Hobbes and Leviathan said you needed a strong ruler for security. The economic system in Western absolutism was mercantilist. Remember, that is to accumulate as much gold and silver, 100% exports. You almost don't import anything, and that's where you build your wealth. They're going to build grand palaces. The example, of course, is Versailles. The king has complete control. This is exemplified in Louis the 14th, if you remember him. He controls religion by revoking the Edict of Nantes. The Huguenots leave, and they actually go find religious freedom in Berlin, believe it or not. So he completely undoes that. He has the political power of absolutism, where he creates the intendant system, where he appoints all the provincial rulers, which would be like our president appointing all the governors in the U.S. Imagine how much power that would be. And by building Versailles is a symbol of this power, because he gets all the nobles to go to Versailles. That way he can control them and prevent revolt in the provinces. So Versailles was genius in that sense. And lots of fighting ends with the Treaty of Utrecht. Now, notice he is going to die. Just if we get a DBQ about him, he dies about 1713, around the time of the Treaty of Utrecht, and which I'll have more notes on that. So this time frame, remember, he is going to die around the 1713. So as our understanding of periodization. You have Eastern absolutism. You have Peter the Great. He was more absolute than, of course, Louis the 14th. How is he absolutist? He creates a navy. He creates a new city, a new capital. He brings it from Moscow to St. Petersburg, names it after himself. He builds his palaces. He controls religion. He westernizes it by bringing it under his authority. He westernizes noble. If you remember, they have to cut their beards, the beard tax, if you wanted to keep it. Peasants are living under horrible conditions. Literacy increases a tish, but Peter the Great brings Russia really into European history. And those are some quick ones. You can just think about absolute power and able to answer that. We don't see that in Britain, though. In Britain, we have it's known as British constitutionalism. This will lead up to the very important year, guys, of 1688, which is the Glorious Revolution. But this is the time period of the English Civil War. It has political and religious elements to it. Let's focus on the religious elements right now. Anglicanism is forced onto Calvinist Scotland. The Archbishop of England says we are going to force them to adopt our common book of prayer. The Calvinists don't like this and they revolt. Also within London, within England, you have the Puritans want more church reform. They are going to revolt. The most famous Puritan, of course, is Oliver Cromwell. You also have political causes of the English Civil War. So you have the Anglican Prayer Book is the main religious one I would use. Political ship money, and remember, the Parliament does taxation. Charles the second gets Charles the First gets around that by the use of ship money, which he forces all the cities to pay a tax for a navy, and so that's what basically that does. It used to only be the coastal towns who had to pay this, and this is how he gets around Parliament, the idea of taxation. Another thing they disagreed on, of course, politically, is who had power over the military. The king said, I do. Parliament said, no, now we do, because of this perceived Irish threat. Anyway, they get into their sides. Cavaliers, Royal versus the Roundheads, which is Parliament. And basically, they fight in this civil war. Uh, Obviously, Charles the First is defeated, and we know he's going to be beheaded. And Cromwell, through a series, becomes the virtual dictator of England. All right, and so he is then going to go do some bad stuff to the beat up on the Scottish, and really do some horrible things to the Irish, almost genocidal type stuff in Ireland. And then, of course, when he's done with, you get what is known as the Restoration. Charles II comes back, and then his brother James II comes to power. And then, of course, as you know, he has the son. Scares everybody that all the other kings are going to be Catholic from here on out, and he is basically going to be overthrown in 1688. And basically, a group of parliamentary people, they go over to the Netherlands and they invite William and James's sister Mary, who are married to each other, to come and overthrow James II. And basically, James II is overthrown. William and Mary, their co-regents, are on the throne. And it is during their time that you get the famous English Bill of Rights. You get a limited government is enshrined, which we know is a constitutional monarchy. And you also get the idea that there can never have a Catholic king. After William and Mary will be another queen who will rule, and I just lost my train of thought with her. Why can't I think of that lady's name? Queen. I guess it doesn't matter right now. She will rule, and then after that, you get the Hanover Kings. I know I will think of her name in a second. It'll come to me. Um, so, with that being said, that is basically how that's going. But basically, it's important to understand the Glorious Revolution, the Bill of Rights, limited government are all elements of this in 1688, and that is a pretty big deal that we have. So, why can't I remember her name? I know she rules from like 1702 to 1714. Queen Mary. Anyway, all right. During the late half of the 17th or 18th century, the 1700s, we get the rise of the idea known as the Enlightenment. All right. And basically, you get a bunch of stuff in the Enlightenment. You get the ideas of freedoms, freedom of speech and press, popular sovereignty, limited government. There's this idea of natural rights. This is, of course, John Locke, life, liberty, and property. This is Montesquieu, which are the three branches. You get ideas of religion, freedom of worship, separation of church and state, exemplified by the writer of Voltaire. You get this idea of classical liberalism, which includes all those elements, of course, and of course the idea of a free market, which means you can buy and sell what you want, exemplified by Adam Smith. You get intellectual freedom, which is knowledge is collected and open to everyone. This is exemplified by Diderot's Encyclopedia, the idea that you can think for yourself, which is pretty cool. The internet has got probably the best example of that right now, and it comes with its own problems. You get enlightened despotism. Enlightened despotism is the idea that you have an enlightened despot, but there's also some freedoms. Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, and especially Joseph II. The elements you can use any of these three right here as your examples for, and then throw in this. They basically all reduce censorship. They also reduced torture and capital punishment. The idea of Frederick the Great is you can say what you want, but obey my rules. And that was kind of a big deal at the time. Say what you want, and you get some religious toleration. And you can use these three rulers as enlightened despots in these examples right here. And of course, you're going to get the scientific revolution, which is happening at the same time, of course. It's an intellectual movement. It's going to attack a lot of the tenets of the Catholic Church. You have Galileo with the telescope. You have ideas. I mean, you have um, Tycho Brahe. You have Isaac Newton, who is the synthesis of all this stuff. And he is going to invent calculus. Actually, he invents the calculus during a pandemic. That's how bored he was. If you think about it, you got to be pretty bored to invent calculus. Um, and he writes this article in 1689, right around the time of the Glorious Revolution. And they're going to attack a lot of the tenets of the Catholic Church. You get Copernicus, if you can remember, and this idea it starts all the way back in the 15th century, going all the way up to 1689, with Newton being the synthesis of all this. The peasants are not really affected by scientific revolution. They can't even read, more or less, understand calculus at the time. So, kind of, this is what's going on. And we end period two with the French Revolution. Well, I'm going to do a separate video about that, but it's broken down into these parts. Let's look at this. So you have the National Assembly. This is when they write a new constitution and a lot of all that revolution, Bastille and all that's happening. And when they write their constitutional monarchy, it becomes now the Legislative Assembly, which doesn't last too long, and this is when the king tries to escape, and the king is overthrown, and the king is going to be killed, right? And when he is arrested and thrown in jail, and then beheaded, and then later on his wife, Louis the 16th, Marie Antoinette, is beheaded, you get the National Convention. National Convention is when you get the Reign of Terror. You get a republic, all right? And in this republic, it's going to evolve into, of course, the Committee of Public Safety because of all the economic threats and the foreign threats. And we'll go into this. And people have just had the Reign of Terror and all the executions in this republic. So they moved to the five-man directory. And this five-man directory is more conservative of nature. And then finally, Napoleon overthrows that in 1799. And you get the age of Napoleon Bonaparte. But we'll go into the French Revolution in more depth. Thanks for watching Period 2 Review. Let me know if you have any questions.